Welcome to Good Chats. I'm your host, Jenny Landon, and we're here to have real conversations about the struggles we face and what it takes to live a life we love. Today, I have the honor of welcoming Carrie Manke on the show. Before we get started, I want to advise our audience that we will be adhering to safe messaging guidelines and we will avoid graphic detail, but we'll also be discussing topics of a sensitive nature that involve sexual assault and abusive relationships. Our intention is to safely share experiences while focusing on the lessons learned. So, Carrie, I want to welcome you to the show. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
We have spent the last few months chatting and getting to know one another, and so I feel like I've gotten to know you beyond simply your experiences that brought you here today. And so before we really dive into your trauma and how you have turned that into a life's mission to help others, I want to start by playing a little game, asking you some questions to help our audience get to know you a little bit better. So let's start with, do you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
Extrovert.
And do you prefer sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
And camping or luxury resort?
Camping. Rustic camping.
Yeah. And then would you prefer winter or summer?
Winter, but if you asked me in the winter, I'd probably say summer.
All right, fair enough. And then do you consider yourself to be a planner or are you more spontaneous?
Planner.
And what is your primary love language?
Physical touch.
Very nice. All right. And what do you value most in this life?
I value the opportunity to help others heal and share their story, to really make an impact in people's lives, to get to a place where, like I've been able to get to, where I've survived my traumas, I've overcome my traumas, and so to help others get to that place and help them understand that healing is possible.
Very nice. Yeah, and I know, when we were setting up to get ready this morning, I sat with you for a minute and asked us to both get grounded in our intention for why we're here. And I really loved your answer and just your authenticity. And so I would love for you to share with the audience today, like, what is your intention of being here on Good Chats?
My intention is to allow others a space to share and let them know that it's okay to be vulnerable and open up about your experience, and also recognizing that there's emotions that come along with any trauma. One of those predominant emotions that I experienced was shame, and to understand that that's okay to have those kinds of emotions, but that they don't have to control your life or rule your life, and you can overcome those emotions, you can heal from them, and like we were saying, healing is possible, to really give that message to others.
Very nice. So now, to help our audience better understand where you're coming from, will you share with us what was your experience?
So my sexual assault story, I was 21. I was headed out to a bar to meet a friend, and I was walking from my car when I was grabbed at knife point. I was taken into his car, stabbed, raped, and then he drove me around for a while, wasn't going to let me go. Eventually did let me go, and it's miraculous that I'm alive today.
Yeah, and so grateful. Now, your journey obviously didn't stop there, and that in a lot of ways was the start to a new path. And, you and I've talked a lot about the experiences that people go through when they have experienced trauma, and how we really aren't raised to understand how to navigate even, arguments, much less a serious traumatic event. And through our conversations, we've talked about the difference between coping and healing. And I think it's really important that we talk about that, because I know that I hear people say all the time, well, I'm coping, And so what was coping like for you after your trauma?
Great question. Coping, I was dealing with PTSD. I was going through shock, denial, anger. I was trying to get through every day, just one day at a time. So I turned to unhealthy coping mechanisms, unfortunately. I was going to therapy and getting the treatment that I needed, but I turned to alcohol and found myself in unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships, because I didn't know how to live healthy or how to have healthy emotions. So unfortunately, that's what coping looked like for me as I was trying to navigate how to get through life and how to not let this define my life, but it was a part of my life now, this experience that I was just trying to get by.
And what would you say helped you to recognize that you were just getting by? Like, what was the shift for you that helped you to transition from coping into healing?
It was about 2 years after my assault that I had gone through pretty much textbook stages of PTSD and had so much anger. That was the lingering emotion, was the anger that I had experienced something like that. Why did this happen to me? And there's evil in this world. Why did I have to be the victim of that? Where I woke up and one day and said, I don't want to live with this anger. I want to actually have a full life. And it was also the calling into the nursing profession where I changed careers that really helped me realize there's a lot of people who go through trauma. Some of it is sexual trauma, that I'm seeing patients like this. And I want to be able to give them hope that you can live a life beyond this. And I need to have that mindset if I'm going to be able to instill hope in somebody else, and that explaining to them the healing is possible.
Yeah. And when you've talked about PTSD, we've talked about PTSD quite a bit, and really around the language that we as a culture use, where, you know, these days people will self-diagnose with, I have depression, or I have anxiety, or I have PTSD, to the point that even recently I was on a trip with my daughter and two of her friends, and one of her friends said to me, well, I have PTSD from when my parents got divorced. You know, and I felt we needed to have a conversation around PTSD and understanding how she was actually creating more harm for herself by labeling her experiences as now, staying in a place of PTSD years after her parents' divorce. And so when we were preparing, I got to read through some of your slides from past presentations you've given, and I loved the way that you presented what is PTSD and who experiences it. And so I'd love for you to share with our audience what really is PTSD and who should be using that as a term that they're going through it.
Sure. I really like, first of all, you identified when you say those things to yourself, you're going to start to believe them. And that's okay, because I had a diagnosis of PTSD. That is okay. But being mindful of what you say about yourself and how you're going to end up believing those things, that feedback loop like we've talked about. So the real definition of PTSD is a persistent re-experiencing of an emotion or event. So for me, that looked like constant flashbacks, inability to sleep. I couldn't walk outside for 3-4 months in broad daylight after my experience because I was afraid I was going to be attacked, because I didn't know what was reality anymore. I thought I could be attacked at any given day or time of day. So it's that constant re-experiencing of the event and the emotions, and you can't just snap out of it. You can't just say, oh, that was a traumatic event. Okay, moving on to the next thing. You literally are trying to survive day to day.
So it's almost like you are reliving
Yes.
that moment. So that's where you say you can't just snap out of it. You're not choosing to think about that event. You're actually reliving it in that moment.
That's a great way to put it, because your brain takes over and says, we're going to relive this right now. We're going to play this video, have this flashback. You're frozen. And it's that constantly, until you're working through those stages of PTSD and getting the therapy or the treatment, the healing that you need, that you can't realize today. It's today, it's this day, it's this year. That happened then. Your brain, you just can't even do that.
Right. So now for someone who is going through PTSD and those who are around them, right? If you can touch on, you've talked about EMDR helped you to be able to navigate those moments, but what are some things that you could share? So if a loved one is going through PTSD, that someone would be able to identify, like, you know, they are not here, they are not present, as you just said, you're no longer present in the moment, you're back in that situation. What are some signs or some clues that an individual is having one of those moments? And what are the things that someone around them could do to support them through that?
That's a great question. There's often that blank stare that comes across, and you can see they're just not present anymore in the situation. They almost look like they're dissociating, but then your emotions will change quickly, really quickly. So you'll all of a sudden turn to anger, become super irritable, and it's not like you're having a bad day. It's a very quick emotion and switch. So when you see somebody switch into that space, the best thing to do is give them the space, the grace, the comfort that they need, and help them understand you're safe. Because that is what they're experiencing. I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. That's what my brain told me when I walk outside in the middle of the day. I'm not safe, I'm not safe. Because it's protecting you. That's what our brains are meant to do. It's self-preservation so that this doesn't happen to me again. So as a loved one, understanding they're not lashing out at me with this anger. I just need to help remind them you're safe. It is not that day, and I'm here for you. And sometimes it's just the course of going through whatever their brain is going through for them to come back to the present and then reminding them they're safe.
Right. And then I think, recognizing that everyone's different. And so maybe this is a conversation people need to have when they're not in the mix of a moment like that, a PTSD moment, where I know my daughter does not have PTSD, but she does have extreme anxiety and sensory issues. And her anxiety can cause her to shut down or can cause her to become erratic. And what I've found is talking to her during calm moments to say, what would help you most in those moments? Do you want me to try to hug you? Do you want me to just back off? Do you want me to try to talk you through it? Because you were saying to give people space, where maybe for someone else, they do need that, like that comfort, that physical touch. So finding ways to have those conversations, which I know that you and I are both a big believer in having healthy conversations around things that can feel difficult.
Yes.
But being able to talk to our loved ones about what we're experiencing and what does help me in those difficult situations. And so, you also, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the guilt and the shame. And one of the reasons you and I were so focused on wanting to talk about healing was recognizing that there are a lot of programs out there that talk about prevention, and you can go and take self-defense classes and you can do all of these things. And I know that I took self-defense in college, and I definitely learned some things that were helpful. And I think that there are some incredible organizations that are talking about prevention. But you and I both know that not every situation is preventable, right? And we also talked about there's already shame that comes from living through an assault like that. But then you brought up to me the added shame of questioning what you could have done differently to prevent it. And so I guess I want to talk a little bit more about the shame piece and how you've been able to navigate the shame and the guilt and what that's been like for you.
It's interesting because people would tell me all the time, how do you have any shame, or why would you blame yourself for what happened to you? You were a victim of opportunity. You were grabbed at knife point. Of course, you acted the way you were supposed to act, or how you thought would get you out alive in the moment. But I still had that emotion. So to be told I shouldn't have that wasn't helping. And I needed to honor that emotion and really sit with it and help understand, why am I feeling shame? Well, of course, I'd love to not have had that experience. I could have done something differently. But in order to heal from an emotion, especially like shame, it's first acknowledging that emotion is okay. That it's okay I have shame around this experience. And then working through more EMDR therapy really helped me with that as well. And I still have that emotion come up once in a while when I talk about my assault, and recognizing that's normal. Because again, there's no normal response, like you said. And when I've talked with sexual assault victims immediately after they're assaulted, there's no normal response. They could be laughing. They could be shut down. There's a predominant emotion is shame, but there's no normal response. So acknowledging that and just having that self-awareness and self-love, that it's okay that I'm going through that emotion and I don't have to be stuck in that, but acknowledging is the first step to healing with something especially like shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you and I have both talked about the importance of really owning who we are through these experiences, and that developing self-love, right? And so for you, and so how long has it been since your assault?
16 years.
16 years. And you said the first 2 years were where it was really just trying to survive, right? Which is interesting when I say it now, because I know even after losing my dad to suicide, the first 2 years were the hardest. It was like the first year for me was shock. And the second year was it setting in, and like, this is reality. So would you say it was similar?
Very similar.
Very similar, yeah. And this is where I will say pain is pain. Trauma is trauma. So regardless of what your traumatic experience has been, healing is still possible. Healing is healing. And this is where, you know, I believe one of the things that has helped me the most through my journey is having a connection to other people, right? And that has helped me to really discover who I am and what I'm capable of. What has that journey been like for you in discovering self-love?
It started with talking about my experience. I didn't talk about it for 10 years because I had shame, because I would get a response that I didn't like, or that hurt, or wasn't compassionate or empathetic enough. So it took being vulnerable to share about my experience and kind of just own it, that this has been a part of my life, and then finding out that other people have experienced something similar, and that we all have similar emotions. Like you said, trauma is trauma, whether it's the severe PTSD or not. Trauma has similar emotions and a pattern of recovery and healing. And the more I can talk about it and relate to other people and have that safe space to share, like you create on this episode and this show, to give the safe space for people to talk about their experience and the emotions, can break that down so that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's safe to be vulnerable, because every human has gone through something, and everybody has experienced pain. So we don't have to put up this front that I don't have any of that, you know, like, because we can talk about our similar emotions and our trauma and our pain, and that can help then move us to the next level in that healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And like what we were talking about earlier with the feedback loops and the things that we tell ourselves. And, you know, I want to talk to you about compounding trauma. And what does that mean? Do you want to share with everyone what compounding trauma is and what it's been like for you in your life?
Sure. So, anybody can experience a traumatic event. I was in a car accident. That's a traumatic event. I attempted suicide. That's a traumatic event. But as more things pile up, the term of compounding trauma means if you don't take the time to heal from those things, it's going to continue to get worse. And your ability to cope, your ability to recover is going to be less and less and less the more that piles up if you don't heal from those incidents or these events. So for my experience I struggled with depression as a teenager. I attempted suicide as a teenager. I then was raped, then got into a very unhealthy marriage with domestic violence. So if I look back at the course of my life, I had compounding trauma that just continued and continued. And like we were talking about coping mechanisms, I was turning to alcohol, even in my marriage, because I hadn't dealt with or healed from those traumas.
And I can say, you know, the importance of owning the trauma, and working through it, right? And that there's also a difference between surviving and thriving, right? And for us to get to a point where we're thriving, I know that my experience has been to have to sit with that pain, to acknowledge the pain and work through it, And that oftentimes that is really difficult to do. It hurts. I mean, healing is a form of growing, and there is a lot of pain that will surface. But when we acknowledge that pain that's surfacing and we release it, that's what allows us to build that new foundation, right? And then we'll just continue to build, layer after layer, so that we can grow. And I think that's where we start to experience genuine self-love and that recognition of I am worthy, right? You and I both talked about this, like going through periods of our lives of feeling unworthy and, and just those questions around who am I? Can I even do this? Can I really help people? Can I help myself? And so with your moving forward, what would you say to someone who is going through this right now that's still at that raw, vulnerable, I don't even know what the first step is? What advice would you have for them in taking a first step to healing?
For me, therapy was really helpful. And I know that doesn't work for everybody, but being able to talk about it is really what therapy is, and sitting with those painful emotions, like you said. My mom drove me to therapy because I didn't want to go. And it was really hard, really painful. Like you said, healing is growing, it's stretching, it's not comfortable. But the only way to heal is to actually work through the painful emotions and acknowledge them and sit with them and let them manifest inside you so that they don't stay stuck in there. And acknowledging that and saying to yourself as you're experiencing these painful emotions, I am worthy, I love myself, and this doesn't define me. Because those emotions will stay stuck. I for the longest time thought my sexual assault defined me. That was me. That was the only reason I was alive. That's my story. That's it. That's me. I'm a rape victim, right? And then also transitioning that language from victim to survivor, because if I stay in that mindset that I am just a rape victim, I'm never going to move on to that self-love and survivor and thriving step in the healing journey.
Yeah. I know recently, having gone through some of my own painful moments, that part of that victim mentality is acknowledging that in some ways we want other people to know how much we're hurting. I mean, would you agree with that? Yeah. And so it was this, and even if it wasn't the person who actually harmed me, but it's like I want everyone else to know how much I'm hurting, and then one day I'm going to be healthy, and people will be like, wow, Jenny was able to go from this to this. But the problem is when we stay focused on, see me hurt, so then you can see me shine later. We create a pain that isn't healthy, right? And we can then spiral further down. And so you've talked about therapy, but you and I also talked about how going beyond therapy and really getting out and sharing your story with the world, and the impact that's had on you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the first couple times I shared my story, it's so interesting. I blacked out completely.
Really?
Because I was reliving it. Because it was hard, because I was basically allowing myself to have a flashback, which seems so silly and counterintuitive to healing. But the more I could talk about it and share it and speak at conferences and even write my book, the more I could separate it from me as not being who I am. It's a part of me, but it's not who I am.
Yeah. And let me ask you this. Have you been able to find gratitude in your trauma?
Yes. I would never wish that upon someone or say that I'm glad it happened to me, but I am grateful it's a part of my story. and part of my life, because look what I can do with it. Because I can help other people. Like I said, my goal, my purpose, my intention is to help others heal, help them understand that it's possible, help them believe that they can heal from trauma. So I am grateful it's a part of my story that I get to share with others.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And with that, with having the gratitude, and I don't think you and I have actually talked about this yet. I know that part of my healing journey, and even being able to have gratitude also requires me to have forgiveness. And you were talking a lot about the anger and how the anger was really controlling you and that you didn't want that anymore. And so were you able to reach a place of forgiveness with your offender?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I actually was able to forgive him before myself.
Okay, that was my next question. Is if you?
Yes, which is really interesting. But, understanding that it's never okay that somebody hurts you. But as human beings, I don't really feel like it's our intention to hurt other people. That's somebody's going through something if they're hurting another human being. So separating that action from that person, because people are offenders or attackers because they're hurting. So having that grace and awareness and forgiveness for him really helped me move past that anger, because that holding on to that unforgiveness is really only harming me. I'm never going to have him come say, will you forgive me?
Right.
So if I can let go of that, it will let that anger out of me. And then working on that self-love, like we're talking about, the ability to forgive yourself, forgive myself for not doing something different, forgive myself for even staying in a victim mindset. I had to work through that forgiveness because I was ashamed that I stayed a victim for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So forgiving myself for that as well has been a journey.
Wow. I feel like we could talk about this, and we have talked about this for hours and hours. But as we're coming to a close, I want to ask you one last question, which is, given this experience, given what you've been through, what would you say has been the greatest lesson you've learned that's helping you to live a life you love?
Acknowledging what you go through, acknowledging pain, and not allowing it to define you, but letting it become a part of you and being vulnerable to share with others.
Very nice. Well, I greatly appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
And we will have Carrie back in a couple of weeks. But for now, I want to thank our audience for being here, joining us today. And until next time, I ask that you be good to yourselves and to those around you.